Hi again. So here we are, part two of the screenplay evaluation. So well done for giving part one a go. And it was nice to see everyone in the live lessons. So well done. We've only got a few weeks to go, so keep the momentum going, keep joining, keep doing some work. Remember, all we've got to do now is submit the screenplay, which most of you have done. So the second draft, where you've independently redrafted it, and the screenplay evaluation. So remember, it's all about how you've written the screenplay in cell text, how you've crafted the narrative, how it develops, how it reflects genre and technique. Um, and the first part was all about narrative, so well done for giving it a go. Now, the second part of the screenplay evaluation talks about stylistic systems. So remember all the stuff you did with me on mise-en-scene, sound, editing, cinematography. Well, you have to talk about how your screenplay does reflect those techniques, which it does. Maybe not explicitly, this isn't a shot list, but within your descriptions, within your development of the story, you are suggesting to the reader how visually and cinematically it will appear on screen. So the second part, I want you to write around 500 words again, not too much, about the stylistic system that you're developing within your screenplay. Now remember, you will produce a storyboard based on this. So in the storyboard you will talk about how this develops. So you'll say, from my screenplay I've now developed some shot types, and I've developed some mise-en-scene and use of props, costume and makeup. Okay, so you do have to talk about the stylistic system in relation to your screenplay as a starting point. So I'll show you how to do this. So the question there says, how does your screenplay create meaning and effect? Well, obviously it's through the written word, so it's creative writing task, but also you are visualizing it and developing the production into a storyboard. So it's kind of like we are going to make the film, so you do have to talk about these film techniques. Now remember, you only storyboard a section from your screenplay, 2 to 3 pages, so you want to think about a dramatic sequence that you want to do that, but we're not doing that until next year anyway. So this evaluation will help you start to think about planning the next stage of the production. So what are you going to comment on in this section? Well, the 4 elements of style that we've studied. So you can comment on mise-en-scène, cinematography, sound or editing. Again, you do have to compare it to your short films and your own film research. So again, I've got student work that will show you how to do that. So the first example, we've got here a student paragraph that's developing their evaluation to talk about mise-en-scène. So they've done the first part like you did on narrative. You've talked about genre and narrative theory, how you've structured and developed the screenplay so far. You then start to suggest that, as well as narrative theory, there's some important stylistic, you might use the word aesthetic, which just means style, some qualities in your screenplay that suggest how it will be visualized and presented on screen in terms of sound and image. So this paragraph really talks about mise-en-scène well. They start to talk about the importance of location and lighting, and some of the tonal designs that create the genre and the narrative landscape for their characters. I think it's really nice and descriptive. Obviously they're talking about their kind of supernatural horror film, and they talk about location. They link it to the character and the development of the narrative well. Also, you'll see the second small little paragraph. Again, they do quickly reference one of the short study films. So for the higher grades, you are dropping in your research still. Okay, you could mention one that you've mentioned before, or you could mention others that we've studied. It's up to you. So there we have a paragraph on mise-en-scène. Now remember, I think that's the one that you need to start with, because there's so much to talk about there. In your screenplays you would have talked about location. You might even talk about costume, how you develop the identity of a character. Definitely lighting. Also, you probably talk about important props, iconography that's created, and some of the meaning that's created through props, costume, physical performance. So try and do a nice juicy paragraph on mise en scène, because obviously that is the main visual element of direction in film. So the second paragraph, sound. Now, we did say that you can include sound in your screenplay. Um, where do you put it? Well, you put it in the description of action. So in your paragraph writing, the description of action, you're describing mise en scène mainly, but you're dropping in, it could be some of you have done some great examples where you're dropping in examples of music that's played, soundtrack music, also instrumental music that creates tone and suspense or tension in some way. Some of you also talk about important diegetic sounds, so not just dialogue, but it might be there's a great example of a battle going on in one of your screenplays, and you could hear the kind of war zone across the hill. Someone else talked about a car crash that kind of woke up the neighbourhood. There's some brilliant discussions of sound there, and you can even drop in words like diegetic and non-diegetic into your descriptions within your screenplay. So this is a great example here. They talk about the use of music. They also talk about the shifts and change in the music. So this is quite sophisticated evaluation, because they talk about things, volume changes, things fading in and out, and the layering of soundtracks. They also talk a little bit about use of narration. Again, the second paragraph references short film nicely, and they cleverly talk about how they've used sound to construct narrative and meaning, but then they also mention the gunfighter, how it uses sound. Some students might just say, I'm influenced by the sound in Gunfighter, but they develop it in a sophisticated way, because they're also talking about how sound constructs meaning in the Gunfighter very quickly, but a nice little sentence at the end there that tells us about the narrative of the short film. Okay, so another example here. Remember another film style, cinematography. Now, you can take some lines from this and drop in some comments in your evaluation, because cinematography, we've told you kind of to avoid it in a way, because you're not dropping in shot types. So in cell text there is a drop down menu option to add shots. This will turn your screenplay into a shooting script, which the crew would use to actually film the sequence. We're not doing that, and the exam board don't want lots and lots of shots listed through your screenplay. However, the descriptions of action do suggest how you could translate that into shot types. So if you're talking about a location, maybe you're thinking about establishing shots. If you're talking about a prop or some physical movement of the characters, maybe we're moving into the territory of mid shots or close-ups. Okay, so this is quite a sophisticated answer again here, where the student says, although in a creative screenplay like our coursework you wouldn't get lots of shot types, I have referred to possible shots in my description of action, so you could use that line. Okay, and then they talk nicely about some of the important props and locations in their screenplay. And again, the last little paragraph there, they compare it to shot types in high maintenance, and how important some of these subtle shot variations were in suggesting the story and the relationship between characters. So you could do a paragraph on cinematography. I've not added a paragraph here on editing. You probably won't have time in your 500 words to talk about all four elements of style. If it was me, I'd start with mise en scène. I'd try and drop in a comment about sound and cinematography and some comparisons there. If you've got a film, some of your screenplays are very fast-paced in terms of time frames. Some of your short films, one that I read, jumps over a 10-year period, so there's lots of elliptical editing and the time frame is very compressed. So you could easily do a little paragraph there on editing and compare it to Legette. Okay, but you probably won't have time to talk about everything. So definitely mise en scène, think sound, cinematography, and if your screenplay explores the concept of time in an interesting way, maybe like Boyhood, you could do a little paragraph on editing there. Okay, the last paragraph is the conclusion. So the conclusion is I've finished my screenplay, I'm proud of it, I've used cell text to produce it, so hopefully it's professionally formatted with no errors. So remember, go over the past session that says about the errors. You can't have errors in it. You know, if it's a bit sloppy, there's no way we can give it an A or a B. So have it watertight in terms of format, and then hopefully it's creative and generic and it's a fun screenplay. So again, one thing that I've done in the conclusion here is I've asked the students to reinforce that starting point in the brief. So they've again, if you look in bold here, they did it at the start in part one. They've done it again in the end here, where they've said, my starting point was a narrative that establishes and develops a single camera. So you put whatever your starting point was in there. You could even put it in bold so I can see it's there, because it must be there. And they talk about what they've produced and how hopefully engaging and fun it was for them as a creative project, as well as the audience that they want to produce for. And they do a little summary of the research, which I think is good practice at the end there. So they reference the short films, which are compulsory, and the examiner will think, oh, that's good. They've definitely referenced the short films. And they've extended their research to talk about favourite feature films. So they've mentioned their feature films in the end there. So you could literally just recraft this conclusion to reflect your choices and your research. Okay? And then basically you put the two parts together. 400, 500 words on narrative, development of the screenplay, 500 words on film style, the aesthetics, the cinematic visuals and sound that you also have started to explore within the screenplay. So you're not talking about the storyboard yet. It's all about how the screenplay is suggesting that you're creating this cinematic production. Okay, so give it a go. Remember, we will mark these. We will say add this, add that, explain this, explain that, give you some suggestion on how to improve these things. But over the next 4 weeks, we need a finished script and a finished evaluation. So there's part 2. So give it a go. We'll have a chat in the live lessons and I'll talk soon. Thanks.